Pastor Jason, thank you for the privilege of speaking here. There's a special congregation and a special piece of real estate around this building. I was here 3 years ago speaking for a weekend with a good friend of mine from Israel named Peter Tsukahira. And as I was walking around the campus, I had this strangely warm feeling. Maybe it was while I was circling John Wesley out there. And I had this sense that the Lord was drawing me to this school. And, you know, it was back in 1981 that I did my MDiv, and that's a long time ago. And going back to school, I mean, at 63 years of age. But I dropped into the administrative office, asked about the doctoral program here, and Milton Lowe said, well, if you'd come a month ago, I could have got you maybe into the cohort that's starting this summer. And so I thought, it looks like I missed God on this. I came too late. Registration had closed. Anyway, he said, before you go, let's go down and see if the dean of the Beeson Center is here. We walked into his office, and as I walked in, David Geiertsen said, Wayne, what are you doing here? And here, I didn't even know Dave Geiertsen was here on campus. He was once the president of Asbury University, Regent University, and many other institutions. But I've known Dave for over 40 years, and fellow Canadian. And here he was at the seminary when I was feeling this warmth about the school. And so the next day I went to pick up some brochures and ask, and just to take back to Israel and see if maybe in the future I would come back here. And as I walked into Milton's office to get the brochures, he said, you know what? After we met Dave yesterday and I told you it was too late to register, I think if you fill in an application now, maybe we can get you in. So they got me in, and I've been working at this for 3 years now, almost finished my dissertation, and it's been fun most of the time. And hopefully graduate in May, and I'll be back in your territory again for that. Lord willing, pray that I get this thing done. And had lots of favor this week as I've met with my coaches, and things are going well. Just real quick to tell you about some of the work that we've been doing in Israel. So we got there in 1983, my wife and I and our 2 sons. We now have 4 sons. Got there in a very strange way. We were serving in Toronto, Canada, happy there. I was an assistant pastor in a downtown church. My wife was involved in Christian television. Had no plans to go anywhere else. But we went on vacation and stopped at a church north of Toronto. And that Sunday morning, the pastor saw us in the audience and told his wife, invite Wayne and Ann to our home for dinner. We didn't know them that well, but they invited us for dinner. And over dinner, Jim Cantillon, the pastor, said, I've just come back from Israel. I feel like the Lord's calling us to go there. We're about to resign our church. They don't know yet. And when I was there, I felt like we should start a ministry to bring young people, Christian young people, to Israel to be a witness on the kibbutzim, the communal communities, farms in Israel. And then when he told some government officials in Jerusalem about that, they said to him, well, you know, there's some people like you, these kind of charismatic type people. They'd probably love to have a church. You could start a church in Jerusalem. And they offered him a clergy visa. And I'm here are these Israelis who are unbelievers suggesting the idea of starting a church. So he's telling us this crazy story, hard to believe. We thought it was illegal even to preach the gospel in Israel. And in the middle of his story, he suddenly said, when it's time for us to start the congregation in Jerusalem, would you and Ann come and help us do that? This was totally out of the blue. He hadn't even prayed about it. And so that planted a seed in our heart, a burden for the nation of Israel. We started studying and reading everything we could about Israel. And then we decided it would be really wise to take a spy out the land trip to Israel. I mean, Caleb and Joshua came back with a great report, you remember? But there were giants in the land. But we took this tour group, and our primary intent was, is this God leading us to go to Israel? Well, we really got a sense of confirmation. Decided we would join this other couple, moved to Israel in 1983, and started what was just a little Bible study in downtown Jerusalem, which is now King of Kings community in Jerusalem, which has become a mother of many daughter congregations. And the Lord revealed to us, after a few years really, a vision statement, which was to plant congregations, to train leaders for ministry, and to be a catalyst for unity and cooperation in the body in Israel. So for 36 years now, that's been our focus. And so the Lord's enabled us by His grace to plant a number of congregations, and now a network of congregations, not just the ones we've started, but others that want to join now. And then the school we started to train leaders has become the National Bible College of Israel, called Israel College of the Bible. And now all the way from just unaccredited evening courses when we started to now all the way to the Doctor of Ministry program. And over 2,000 Israelis have studied in that Bible college, and many trained for ministry. And so we thank God for how that has developed. One of the exciting things about that school, we turned it over to the local Israelis after 5 years. So we can't take any credit for what's happened there. But I would say maybe the most effective digital evangelism going on in the world today is done through that college. And if you were to go to YouTube and type in the words, "I met Messiah," you would discover about 100 testimonies of Jewish people that have come to faith in Jesus as their Messiah and boldly proclaiming they are followers of Jesus. And you know how many people have watched those videos? It's now 90 million views of these testimonies. And about 20 million have watched the Hebrew versions of those testimonies. You know, there's only maybe 8 million people in the world that speak Hebrew, and here there's 20 million views of these testimonies in Hebrew. So God is at work. God is alive. I believe that God is moving by His Spirit across the land of Israel. I think the best is yet to come. And I believe that in these latter days, before the return of the Lord, there's going to be a great revival that sweeps across the land. I would ask you to pray for us. Pray for the body of believers in the land of Israel. And you need to come and visit us as well. And I know that Pastor Jason has right in your weekly, as he calls it, talking about the pilgrimage in 2020 to come and not just see the ancient stones of archaeological sites, but to meet the living stones, the believers, and the ministries that God is using in the land of Israel. Pastor Jason mentioned FIRM, the Fellowship of Israel-Related Ministries, and that has been that third aspect of what we believe that God called us to do, not just to plant congregations and train leaders, but to be a catalyst for unity. And so about 4 years ago, we launched FIRM, Fellowship of Israel-Related Ministries, and we now have 59 ministries in the association of quality ministries working in the land of Israel. We do an annual trip called the Jerusalem Encounter Tour and Conference, two-day conference at the end of the tour. And Pastor Jason and a number of others from your church were there, and you were there the previous year, you just told me. And I'm going to show you a little video clip. I think it's pretty exciting to see what it's like, and I hope it'll encourage you to come with Pastor Jason in 2020 to join us for that. So let's watch. Is there anybody here who wants to join us in 2020? Yeah, a few? Great. Well, I'm glad I had an opportunity to practice on the people in the first service. It didn't go all that well, but I think it's going to be a little better this time. I hope, with God's help. So pray for me, will you? Would you please scroll in your Bible, please, to Daniel 11. Aren't you glad that scrolls are making a comeback? Okay. So open up that device. So I've entitled this message, Dare to be a Daniel. Dare to be a Daniel. That's what we're going to look at, is a little bit of the life of Daniel. I want us to be strong and courageous, inspired by this great man of God. Before I read, though, I want to have my wife stand. My wife, Ann, of 42 years of marriage, and what a wonderful partner she is. And mother to 4 sons, 6 grandkids. Later this afternoon, we'll be driving to south of Nashville, where 3 of our grandkids live, with our son Joel and his wife, and it's going to be fun. Be good. So, Daniel 11. One verse we're going to kind of focus in on, and I'll give you some background to the verse, but it's verse 32 of that text. But the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. Can we make this your memory verse of the day? Can you say that verse after me? The people who know their God will take action. No. The people who know their God will stand firm and take action. Can we try that one more time? The people who know their God will stand firm and take action. There's a lot of shaking going on in the world today. Have you noticed that? Things are not the way they used to be. It's hard to predict what things will be over the next number of years. Things are moving so rapidly. The changes can just scare you, in the flesh at least. All around the world we're seeing terrorism. We're seeing Christians martyred for their faith. There is persecution on many hands. There could be persecution that comes to America. Do you think that's possible? The way things are going, it would not shock me to see that. Foundations of our culture are shaking. Our identity is shaking. Who are we? What's a man? What's a woman? What's a lot of things these days? I remember a few years ago we were in the Bible Belt, even more Bible Belt than this maybe, and there was a hotel and it's part of a chain, and all around the pool and in the lobby were, I think, a dozen Buddhas the size of a human being in a Bible Belt. I thought that was a little different, but things have changed in this country. Israel, where we live, is in a place where things are shaking. You remember what was called the Arab Spring. Revolutions all over the Arab world, changes that were starting to take place, and even the thought there might be democracy that would come to the Middle East. Well, that Arab Spring has really turned into an Arab winter. It hasn't really changed much at all. And Israel is facing an existential threat from Iran right now. The potential of nuclear weapons being constructed right now. And they say openly, the Ayatollah is saying openly that they want to erase Israel from the face of the map. But I want to reassure us all today that God is in control, no matter what is going on in the world today. And I also believe that God has Israel on his heart, and that he will not allow that nation to disappear from this planet. Even though it is a target, even though anti-Semitism is arising all over the world, especially in places like Europe. But what a shock that there would be that attack at that Jewish synagogue in Pittsburgh this past year. It's happening and it's spreading around the world. You would think that there was an enemy out there, a spiritual enemy that's especially focused on that nation of people. And I believe that the devil knows his time is short. I think he knows that Israel is part of God's strategic plan for salvation in the latter days. And he has Israel as a target. It's in a world that's being shaken to its axis that we need to hear these words that Daniel says here in chapter 11, verse 32. The people who know their God will stand firm and take action. Let me give you some background into this. Here's Daniel. He's in exile in Babylon. Ultimately, Babylon will be taken over by the Medes and Persians. Daniel is there as a Jewish man, having been exiled when Nebuchadnezzar and his armies invaded Jerusalem, destroyed the temple. God allowed that exile as a way of disciplining his people because of his love, but it's a tough love. And he sent them into exile because of their idolatry and the shedding of blood and immorality on every hand. Daniel is a prophet of God. He peers into the future and he sees a number of things. One of the things he sees is someone coming down the pike of history, an evil king who will arise and invade the land of Israel, and he will persecute the Jews. Indeed, several centuries later, the Seleucid Empire would arise. The Seleucid Empire was a major center of Hellenistic culture, and they tried to impose this Greek culture on every place where they conquered in many parts of the world. And when Antiochus Epiphanes IV became the leader of that empire. He invaded Jerusalem. He desecrated the temple. He brought to an end Jewish sacrifice. And instead of sacrificing according to God's plan and purpose, he began to offer up pigs on the altar dedicated to Zeus. We also know from history that a Jewish family, would arise and it would stand up against this evil conqueror with remarkable courage. Judas Maccabeus, a son of a Jewish priest called Mattathias, would lead what is known as the Maccabean revolt against the Seleucid Empire in the years 167 to 160 BC. This band of defenders of the Jewish faith were inspired by the Hebrew prophets like Daniel. And these Jews knew their God. They stood firm and they took action. It's because of these brave people that the Jews celebrate each year the feast of Hanukkah, the feast of dedication, the feast of lights. And did you know that Jesus himself actually went up to Jerusalem to celebrate that feast of Hanukkah? So he must have thought that standing firm, taking action of those Maccabeans was worth celebrating. As Jew hatred and even hatred of Christians is growing now around the world, we need to be reminded of Daniel's exhortation. You and I need to know our God like never before. Stand firm, be courageous, and let's take action in these difficult days. While earlier verses in Daniel 11 predict with exactitude the actions of Antiochus Epiphanes against the Jewish people, most conservative scholars agree that verses 36 to 39 of this same chapter refer to someone else altogether, someone even further into the future. And the New Testament interprets that as the Antichrist. And listen to these verses, Daniel 11, verse 36 to 39. And a king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. And then verse 39, he shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many, and shall divide the land for a price. I'm not going to speculate about the timing of this future ruler that will come to the earth. But he's coming. And this is a word of warning to all of us today that Daniel's a true prophet. He really did see into the future. And that Jesus himself, the Apostle Paul in 1 Thessalonians, John in the book of Revelation, speak about the reality of that coming evil leader. How would we be prepared for these latter shakings? How should we be prepared? Number one is to know our God like we've never known him before. We need to know the kind of God that's revealed in the Scriptures. Many people would say they believe in God, but they have a God of their own imaginations, the God they would like him to be. And we don't always declare clearly enough to the world the true God that's revealed in the Scriptures. One of the things that's revealed in the Scriptures is that God has a chosen people. He called them not because they were better or greater than any other nation. In fact, God often chooses the least likely to succeed to be used. And Pastor Jason referred to that in the early days of Vineyard. And so, God chooses the nation of Israel to be a priestly nation, to be a mediator nation, to be an instrument of God to bring the nations to the God of Israel. And this is what God says about that ancient people, Israel, that still exists and God preserves. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 6 to 8. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all the peoples on the face of the earth. The Lord did not set his love on you, nor choose you because you were more in number than any other people, for you were the least of all the peoples. And then verse 8 says, the Lord loves you. He says, because he would keep the oath which he swore to your fathers. God is a covenant-keeping God. He has sworn on oath that he will love, in an everlasting love, the nation of Israel. Israel's not perfect, but neither is any nation on the planet, including individuals like you and me. Without God's faithful love, we would all be doomed. Without his grace and his mercy, we would not be saved. Ezekiel chapter 36 and verse 24 and following tell us about what God will do with the Jewish people in the future in order to show that he is the covenant-keeping God. Listen to this. Ezekiel 36 verse 24. For I will take you from among the nations, gather you out of all the countries, and bring you into your own land. Then I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean. I will cleanse you from all your filthiness and from all your idols. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and you will keep my judgments and do them. Then you shall dwell in the land that I gave to your forefathers. You shall be my people, and I will be your God. Israel doesn't deserve to be saved, but do you deserve to be saved? It is by grace we are saved through faith. It's not something we earned. It's not something we worked at and achieved. It's the work of God. He takes the initiative. We love him because he first loved us. And that's the same kind of love he has for his ancient people, Israel, and will express that in a powerful way when he brings his people back to the land. First, to restore them to a piece of real estate, and secondly, to restore them to himself. And then he will cleanse them. He must do that. If they're to dwell in the land that's promised to them, it is conditional, but he's going to make them worthy. I will sprinkle clean water on you. You'll be clean. I'll take out your heart of stone and replace it with a heart of flesh. I'll put my spirit within you and move you to obey me. Wow. That's the promise of God to Israel. The New Testament confirms that God will save his people, Israel. Romans chapter 11, verse 25. And I'm on this point now of knowing our God. And Paul says, I don't want you to be ignorant, brethren, of this mystery. That you should be wise in your own opinion. That blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, and so all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sake, but concerning the election, the choosing, they are beloved for the sake of the fathers. For the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. I believe that God has uniquely gifted the nation of Israel, the Jewish people. And God has a special calling. And that calling has not come to an end. They will return to the original calling, to be that mediator, priestly nation. They will be a light to the nations, as he called them to be. If I had time, I'd read you the whole chapter of of Zechariah chapter 8. It says at the end of the chapter that the day is coming when 10 men from every nation will come up to Jerusalem, and they will take a hold of some people would say the tzitzit, the prayer shawl and the tassels at the end. They will grab his garment and say, we hear that God is with you. Israel will resume that original calling to be a light to the nations. I don't know when that's going to happen. I haven't got the chronology figured out, but I believe the Word of God. I believe it's true. God's not finished with the Jewish people. Paul said in Romans 11, verse 1, has God rejected his people? And he said, absolutely not. And the whole chapter. When you get home, if you want to check out what this preacher is saying. And be like the Bereans, who were more noble than the Thessalonians, because they examined the Scriptures to see what Paul said was true. Read Romans 11. Many people that argue about whether Israel is still the apple of God's eye and His treasured possession, they can quote a lot of different scriptures and prove their point. But then I say, well, just read that one chapter and then tell me what you think. And as I've been doing my doctoral thesis and looking at many commentators, in one place they'll talk as if God's finished with Israel. They're no longer the chosen people. And then I look at what they say in Romans 11 and they start to stutter. And it's like they can't explain it. Like it's so contrary to what their replacement theology or supersessionism would say. We need to know this God, this covenant-keeping God. And we know this, that if God keeps covenant, He keeps His oath to people, He's a promise keeper, then if He has saved us by His grace and brought us into His kingdom, then He's trustworthy, He's faithful, and He proves it because He's loved the Jewish people even on their worst day. He's continued to love them. And on our worst day, God continues to love us. And if you've come into this room today and you've been wandering away from God and you're not passionate like you used to be for Jesus, I want to say that He still loves you. He's got His arms open wide to you and wants you to come back into intimate fellowship with Him today and serve Him with all of your heart. Know this God. If you'll know this God, you'll have confidence and assurance of your faith. Second point is this. We said that the people who know their God will stand firm. Will stand firm. Let's talk about that. Daniel wouldn't have said to stand firm unless he saw a time of great shaking coming, even in his own day. He uses a word in Hebrew for stand firm, chazak. There are several ways in which the word is used in the Bible. It's sometimes used in relation to physical strength in the face of opposition. Moses said to Joshua in preparation for entering the promised land, chazak ve'amatz, which means be strong and courageous. Daniel's saying the same thing. There's a shameful part of Christian history. Back in the 4th century was when the church leadership banned Christians from celebrating any Jewish festivals and engaging in other Jewish-related practices. They intentionally separated the commemoration of the crucifixion of the Lamb of God, separating it from Passover, in order to remove all Jewish connections with Jesus' death and resurrection. The church leaders in 325 AD, when they officially separated Easter from Passover, described the Jews as wretched, blind, and let us have nothing in common. And today, former Christian nations are trying to pass laws to stop Jews from circumcising their sons and practicing their traditions. Another meaning of the word chazak is to prevail or to overcome. In a world that is trying to squeeze the people of God into its mold, we need to heed these words of 1 John chapter 5, verse 4. For whatever is born of God overcomes the world. When the shakings come, we need to overcome. Revelation chapter 3, verse 21 says, He who overcomes, I will grant to him to sit down with me on my throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on His throne. Revelation 12:11 says, And they overcame him, that is the enemy of our souls, because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony. And they did not love their life even when faced with death. There's persecution happening all over the world. People in Syria, Iraq, Sudan, many other parts of the world where people are laying their life down on the line. They're being told, if you don't convert to our religion, we're going to chop off your head. And many have given up their lives because they were faithful and true. They overcame. We might be facing persecution in the days to come. Are we ready to stand firm in the face of threats? Daniel was able to speak with credibility when he challenged his readers to stand firm. He himself faced severe pressures, but refused to conform to this world and compromise his faith. You remember that as a very young man, he was selected with several other young Jewish POWs from Judah, selected by the king to undergo training in the ways of Babylon. But Daniel, the youth, was not influenced. He influenced his society there. Daniel showed his courage when he refused to eat that unkosher food offered by the king. He had convictions. He had principles. Knowing his God and knowing God's standards, he took the risk of arousing the wrath of the king because he feared God and not man. Later in the book, you see how Daniel was ambitious, how his rivals were ambitious and jealous of Daniel's remarkable rise to fame. And they set Daniel, the emperor, when he set Daniel over the kingdom, they conspired and they set out to slander him and to tell lies and bring false accusations against him. And these days, slander and lies and accusations against the people of God are happening. Just go on Facebook, go on other platforms of social media and see what people are saying. More and more, we're facing opposition, slander. To love the Jews today takes a stand, requires us taking a stand. Well, early on in Daniel's career, we read these words in Daniel 2, verse 24. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. What was Daniel saying? He was saying, I've got enemies. They want to destroy me. They want to bring me down, but don't destroy them. Daniel understood that God's purposes were not just for the Jewish people, but for all the nations of the earth. We're called to love our enemies, even in the face of threats. But going on to Daniel 6, in the case of Daniel being slandered by his rivals, we see that none of their schemes succeeded. It was because Daniel was full of integrity. May we be people of integrity, that no mud thrown against us will stick. And so frustrated were Daniel's rivals that they had to invent another scheme to bring him down. So they used the fact of Daniel's loyalty to God's law to cause Darius, who is now the emperor, to realize that Daniel's first loyalty was to his God and not to the emperor. And so we read these words in Daniel chapter 6, verse 6 and 7. Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. That's quite a threat. And what did Daniel do? He went to an upper room and he prayed 3 days to the God of his fathers, and he opened up his windows toward Jerusalem. Daniel did not fear man. He only feared God and was willing to stand firm, knowing that even the doing so might mean he was lunch for the lions the next day. Are we going to be like Daniel in these latter days? In these days of great shaking and threat and persecution? I pray that we will be. But we don't know until it happens. Just a few weeks, 2 months ago, we were doing a concert in our pavilion. This is our sanctuary that we were able to purchase, former movie theater. And we had musicians from all over Israel come to present brand new worship songs in Hebrew on the platform. And we did it back to back, one at 5 o'clock and one at 8. When we arrived at the auditorium, there were about 40 protesters there. These were Jewish, religious, ultra-Orthodox zealots. And they blocked our entrances. We couldn't get into our own facilities. We had, of course, keys to many doors, and we found ways to get the crowds into the auditorium, and we had a phenomenal time of worship together. Nothing stopped. It all went on. But the riot police showed up with the helmets and everything, and you can see it online if you type in CBN News, Jerusalem protests, Messianic, put those key terms in, you'll see for yourself. Now, that's hardly persecution. That's opposition. But I believe the days are going to get more difficult. And I believe we need to heed the words of Daniel, to stand firm in the midst of threats. Open up our windows. Take a stand. Not be ashamed. of our God and seek God's face. And finally, now is the time to be the people who take action. How's your memory verse so far? The people who know their God will stand firm and take action. Many Christians are fatalists. Que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. God's already predetermined the future. What can we do to change anything? I want to tell you that God has decided sovereignly to use the prayers of His people to make changes in history. He's called us to be intercessors, to stand in the gap for our cities, our state, our nation, the globe. Stand in the gap for those who are being persecuted around the world. The people of prayer change history. The people who really pray are having a summit meeting with the King of Kings. We can change the course of history. If anyone had reason to be passive concerning the events of his day, it was Daniel. He had read the book of Jeremiah. It was already revealed that the Jewish exiles would be released, would be allowed to return to Jerusalem after 70 years of exile. He read that in Jeremiah. He could have said, well, God's promised it, it's going to happen. But Daniel did more than just believe the Scriptures. He prayed according to the Scriptures. And you and I need to pray in God's purposes according to the Scriptures. Not to be presumptuous, but pray in line with what God has already revealed, what He already has shown us that He desires to accomplish in the affairs of the world. Many Christians today have withdrawn from society, have in fear or apathy, not gotten involved in the affairs of government and our society in general. But you know that there was a prophet, Samuel, who went to King Saul, and there was Nathan who went to King David, and God sent Isaiah to King Hezekiah. God sent Paul the Apostle to Felix and Festus, and He sent him to Publius, the chief man on the Isle of Malta. He sent these men, and He sent women throughout history to speak to governments, to speak to people in high places. Yes, to pray, but also to take concrete action to see changes in our society. I thank Pastor Jason. He mentioned this prayer meeting coming up, praying into the abortion issue, praying into many other societal problems and challenges. I hope you'll join that prayer meeting. I hope that all of us will realize that God has not called us to be comfortable saints. He's called us to be out on the front lines and be prophetic in our generation. To know our God, to know what He said in His Word, what He's promised. To stand firm, not be afraid of the opposition, but be courageous. Chazak ve'amatz. Strong and courageous. And also take action. Through prayer, first and foremost, that's the most powerful thing we can do. But sometimes God says, I want you to be the answer to your prayers. We can pray, God, Lord, send more laborers into the harvest. And God would say to us, hey, I sent you already into the harvest. I've called you to, with my great commission, to go and make disciples of all nations. Are we going to be the answer to God's prayer and take action and see the world changed? See Wilmore changed? See Kentucky changed? See America changed? See the world changed for God's glory and the expansion of His kingdom in these last days. Things may get tough, but the tough get going when they know God, when they stand firm and they take action. Let's pray. Father, this simple word, Lord, may it be imprinted on our minds, especially when times do get difficult. And we would be tempted maybe to withdraw, to become hermits, to become apathetic and let the world fall apart. But God, we thank you for Daniel. We thank you for his words. remind us over and over again that we need to know you